welcome to our You and I for the Kenai podcast. Today I am joined by Eric and Aaron, and I'm your host, Kobryn. And we're going to be talking about addiction, the stigma of addiction, as well as the Stomp Out the Stigma event, which is actually a local event going on. It's going to be a 5K walk or run, and there's going to be goodies and prizes. Just something you'll definitely want to go to. We'll talk more about that later, though. First of all, I'm going to start off this conversation with what do we define addiction as?
It wasn't really until the early 90s that we were kind of able to start understanding, substance use disorder. That's another name you'll hear addiction as. And we weren't able to really start to understand kind of how the brain played a role in that. As we've gotten better technology, we can understand the brain better and addictions. So the National Institute on Drug Abuse defines addiction or substance use disorder as a chronic relapsing brain disease that is characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite harmful consequences. You'll see some other definitions out there, but on the National Institute on Drug Abuse would say over 20 million people suffer from addiction in the United States. It's about 1 in 7. In the brain, kind of when we talk about addiction and how it interacts with the brain or what it is in the brain as a disease. So we have some systems in our brain. The limbic system, located deep within the brain, responsible for basic survival instincts, eating, drinking, finding shelter. And when these are completed, our brains reinforce this behavior with a chemical that makes you feel good, dopamine. Right. And it says, let's try this again. Let's do this again. And that release of dopamine, that reward system, will be transmitted to some other parts of the brain, such as the amygdala and the hippocampus. And that plays a role in memory. And that will record that feeling so that we seek it again, right? If you were to do something and you do a behavior and the outcome of that is a reward, you might think, wow, I like that reward. If that behavior leads to that outcome, maybe I want to do that behavior again, right? And so the brain interacts in that way. And then you get to this, there's a part of our brain that makes us different, separates us as human beings from other animals, Homo sapiens from other animals, and that's the prefrontal cortex. And the drugs will interact with the limbic system. And as a disease, it can hijack the areas of that brain and of the limbic system, as well as the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in more logical processing and impulse control as well. And it can hijack basically how the brain interacts, and it will convince your brain, it will hijack it and say, I as a substance am the most important thing for your survival. We as humans were built to survive. So eating food, drinking water, reproducing, that substance will then say hey, I'm actually more important. I'm the most important thing in survival. And so we see that substance interact in the brain in a unique way with those who suffer from addiction, and it kind of hijacks that brain, and it makes it really hard for people, if they are dedicated to survival as human beings are, to separate that kind of illusion that the drug is the most important thing. So that's addiction kind of 101. I mean, it gets way more complex, right, but that is kind of addiction 101.
Yeah, and I actually didn't know that before today. I always figured addiction was kind of one of those things that you could just really power through with willpower, and that it was, it was a choice. And really, this is a disease. I have seen the pictures of someone's brain, a regular brain scan, and then someone who is addicted, and it is different. There is less activity in some of those regions, especially around making choices. So it can be very difficult to understand that it is a disease. It's an illness. It can be overcome, but it's not just oh well, you just need to try harder. You just don't want to come out of addiction enough. It really is a struggle.
And I don't think you're alone in that. I think there's a lot of people that kind of have that, not necessarily a lack of understanding, but just not fully educated on the subject. And I think that's a big part of that stigma, the stigma of addiction that kind of comes with addiction.
Yeah, and we want to focus on addiction today, but mental health disorders, they carry the same idea, right? Like depression and anxiety, a lot of that With depression, I think a lot of the public perspective on depression for a long time has been, oh, maybe get up and get outside, just, be happy, feel better, go for a walk, hope you feel better kind of thing, versus, a real disease, a real imbalance, a real something that people, aren't just like, oh, they just like to be sad, or it's nothing like that. I mean, it's a real disorder, that one just does not just power through, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's really hard to relate to something that you're not going through. So if you don't struggle with it from the outside, you just have such a completely different perspective. I believe that's where the stigma comes from. Oh, I'm not experiencing this, or oh, I struggled with, oh, I really love chocolate, which I do. And you could say, oh, well, I just chose not to, and then it was that easy. But this is actually a lot different. It's way more of a struggle.
Yeah, especially from a neurological, a brain standpoint, we are starting to see this different education and knowledge come out as we have this capability to research in such advanced ways. So when we say, one of the things is stigma. What is stigma? Stigma, there's a few different definitions for it, but, set of negative beliefs that a group or society holds about a topic or group of people. It's that mark of disgrace. It's this negative baggage that goes along with being a certain way or doing a certain thing. Right. Or existing just with some kind of property or attribute. And so there's a lot of stigma that goes along with addiction, and I think a lot of it does, come from a misunderstanding of it. And, when you look for a long time, addiction has been looked at as like moral failure. And if addiction is a disease, some of these behaviors that go along with addiction that people attach like to addiction itself, well, addiction is a disease of some of these behaviors that are, looked at from the outside that contributes to addiction stigma. Things like theft, things like dishonesty, right? To try and attain this drug, to try and be able to do more drugs and not get in trouble, or to be able to do more drugs and feel okay, right? Those are symptoms of this disease. The disease is like a hijacking of choice, right? Well, some of the symptoms of that go along and they attach to addiction itself, and it contributes to the stigma in that people who suffer from addiction, people who are in addiction at the time or haven't reached recovery yet, they are morally weak. They are morally irresponsible. They are dishonest. They are these certain things, when really it's people that suffer from a disease, and there is a lot of baggage that goes along with this, and that makes it really hard. And there are some really negative consequences that go along with stigma.
Right, and you see people and you think, why would they make those decisions like that? But it's that kind of craving is more than if you were starving, and more than if you really needed shelter. It just gets that priority.
Right.
And
yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, if you've ever been, I know I've been super hungry and just been like, all right, I will find food in my cupboards. I don't care what it is. I really want it. But it's
yeah.
More
I
than
think
that.
like from we get this idea of people may put you in some kind of moral conundrum, right? And they say, you don't have any money left, but your family's starving. Do you steal bread? That's some great, that's kind of an ethical question. Right. You put that into a type of context with addiction. And if your brain is saying, I need this to survive, as humans, we prioritize survival. We prioritize eating food, we prioritize drinking water. A lot of times we'll prioritize reproduction, and in that, what if you had that same drive, that same prioritizing, but that is, that substance, and then that's addiction.
Yeah, you want it more than anything else. So it's really good to put that into perspective. Now, how that perspective of the stigma, how that really affects people who are addicted, or affects, people who want to come into rehabilitation, who want to get better. That's really important to see how that plays into this.
And if you're listening to this and kind of thinking you might want a little more information, a little more in-depth information about, the scientific end of addiction, there are some great resources, even online or probably in your public library, like addictionpolicy.org is one we've been on a lot today doing our research, and I think they have a lot of good information. They have a little video. They can, if you're more of a visual learner, that you can
I
check
think
out
what
and
a
look
short,
at.
like 4-minute video.
Yeah,
I think
really
is what
short.
it is. Yeah, that can really sum those up. And part of it is, with stigma. Stigma hurts. If there's, as we're going to talk about, there's a 5K walk run coming up that's put on for Change for the Kenai Coalition, and that's going to be at Soldotna Creek Park, June 23rd. The check-in's at 11:30. Well, if we want to stomp out the stigma, there's a reason why. Stigma hurts. Being attached to, having this mark of disgrace, it hurts people. It's perpetual discrimination. It pushes people to isolate. It pushes people to, you have external stigma. You're looked down upon by other people, but it also can create what's called internal stigma, and you start to identify and look at yourself how other people are beginning to look at you, and so you start to not only be viewed as lesser, but you can start to view yourself as lesser as well. And as you lose self-esteem, as you lose hope, and as you lose the idea that people are there for you and people support you, and especially if you're already in a really difficult spot and are struggling with addiction, the stigma only really, really, really furthers the difficult circumstances of which you are in.
Right, and if you are experiencing that, you're probably going to want comfort from somewhere, and if you can't look for that comfort in friends, in family, in the community, you know what is going to be your companion? It's probably going to be whatever
further substance.
Yeah, exactly.
It can only drives you further into a situation in which you want to get out of, right? You're starting to lose hope, and you look around for hope from other people. Not there. In fact,
and this
it's
event's
the
gonna
opposite.
Be great for that.
Yeah, the event really is meant to bring people together. It's meant to bring support around the idea that people are here for everybody. People are here for people who are in addiction, people who haven't quite reached recovery, people who it's to celebrate as well. People who are in recovery. It's to be there for people who have loved ones and that are either in recovery or suffering from addiction at this point. And we want to fight back against stigma. We want to offer this event some of the effective ways for individuals and society to help reduce stigma. Offer compassionate support, right? This run is meant to bring people together and to bring a face of compassion, a group of compassion, to say we're here for everybody suffering, for everybody that's in recovery, and we're here for ourselves because we as a society want to be more compassionate and more kind and understanding for our neighbors and our loved ones and our community. And this run is meant to bring our community together and get our community behind getting people into recovery, celebrating that, and being a real just face for kindness, really, and understanding.
Right. And, the solution for stigmas really is education. And that doesn't necessarily have to be in you could say, here's an educational pamphlet on how we can help by ending the stigma. But education to beat a stigma can also be really applied through experience, and I feel like that's where this run really comes in, is you get that experience of interacting with these people who are like, hey, let's really support the people who are struggling in our community, and you get that education, hey, maybe these people are in pain and they need help, rather than, I don't want to have anything to do with people who have fallen on these hard times and are struggling with this. And so I think the run really facilitates that.
One of the things that I think of when you say these people, it's hard at this point, and I think I mentioned this at the last podcast, at this point, it's all of us. The addiction, as I said, 1 in 7 people are suffering. Yeah. That's not really a different group at this point. That's a pretty, if it's not you, it's someone you love. One person further than that, maybe somebody has somebody you love. This is an us thing. It's a community thing.
Right. It's so easy to underestimate how big this has become. Like I know I catch myself. It's like, oh well, these kind of people need help, but really it's really around, and so it's something we need to be more aware of.
Yeah, and I think Change for the Kenai is really, I mean, that's what it's all about, right? Connecting community, saving lives, addressing addiction, drug abuse, and how do we help? Well, one of them is there's a stigma around it, and the stigma is not helping. It's really, really hurting people, and let's stomp that out. Aaron, you were talking earlier about the education. The education's, there will be definitely some educational parts to that. But another thing we were talking about was what really breaks down barriers of preconceived notions that you have when you start having real human interactions with people, and you begin to make connections with these people, and you have to with different people, and you reevaluate. Oh, I used to think that all people suffering from addiction were like this, when really you start to meet people that are just like you, who are sons, who are daughters, who are husbands, wives, boyfriends, girlfriends. They have the same hobbies. People have the same hobbies. You share the same interests. There's a lot of common ground here. A popular word today is other. It stops creating people as other, and it starts to create this whole unity in our own humanity.
Totally. And that's why I'm honestly super excited about this run is I think come out, whether you're in recovery or whether you just want more information, come seek us out, ask around, ask the people at Change for the Kenai, and come talk to us. I'll probably be wearing my Birkenstocks, I'll be walking, so we can talk, and you can kind of put a name to our faces and really know that we are actually here to support you, whether you're in recovery or you just want information so you can support somebody that's maybe in recovery. It's kind of why we're doing all this. It's exciting. It's an exciting opportunity to really give back and strengthen our community.
Yeah, and I was at first when I heard about this, I'm like, what's a run really gonna do for the people who are in need? And I really came to understand that the more support we have for this, the better it is. You have these people who are coming out, and there's our city and our state government see that kind of thing, the kind of support that we want, and then they are more inclined to provide these treatment centers and provide support when we make it really plain that we as a community, we really want to fight back against this stigma. We really want to help people in need. It becomes a bigger priority for all of us to help people who need it.
Yeah. So the color run, the Stomp Out Stigma color run, 5K run or walk, Soldotna Creek Park. You can register online, changeforkenai.org/walkathon, walk-a-thon. You can also just Google changeforkenai.org and look up the color run, the Stomp Out the Stigma. You can register online or 11:30 a.m. at the event. I think, Aaron, where's it at again? The Soldotna Creek Park?
Yeah, Soldotna Creek Park, 251 States Avenue in Soldotna. And guys, this is going to, we're kind of touching on a tough subject here, and that's kind of why we're joining, but it's going to be fun, man. It's a color run. There's going to be food, fun, and prizes. It's a whole family event. Definitely. I encourage you to bring your kids, and kind of educate them on the fact that we're all just people. We're all struggling with certain things, and like you said, it's a disease, kind of sort of like mental health in that same realm. So, yeah, come out, have a good time, and
you can register there, right? If you want to show up a little bit early at 11:30, you can register there. Soldotna Creek Park. There's a $15 suggested donation. Changeforkenai.org. Yeah, so we're gonna, stigma. It's not good. It's having negative consequences, and if we all come together between making human connections, getting some education, and just really showing support, we as a community can get involved and stomp out the stigma. That's June 23rd at Soldotna Creek Park. This is Eric, Aaron, and Kobryn. We are you and I for the Kenai. And you can also, one last thing, you can contact Sherry Connor at 907-714-4521, and she is the project coordinator for Change for the Kenai. and she can answer some of the questions that you have. You can also, changeforkenai.org. Again, Aaron, Eric, and Kobryn, you and I for the Kenai. Hopefully we see you at Stomp Out the Stigma Color Run, Soldotna Creek Park, June 23rd.